Amen. You may be seated. And kids, you'll head out with the Johnsons to Fort Kids. You'll have a great time out there and have an awesome time. Adults, take your Bibles, turn them to Mark chapter 6, verse 45. Mark chapter 6, verse 45. That's a death trap of a chord right there. Man, thank you. We don't need to call the 911 on me today. All right, Mark 6, 45. I want to tell you something really encouraging to all of us is that we pulled off the first early service that we've ever done this morning at 9:30. So shout out to everybody who was a part of that. Let's give a round of applause that we were able to pull that off. And Adam has carried a big load making that happen. And I want to tell him appreciate all of his hard work. So give a shout out for Adam over here. And incredible job doing that. Also, I want to tell you something you should be encouraged about. We consistently say here as a church that our goal is to spread God's kingdom into our community. And one of the ways we do that is through a ministry that we launched last week called Dietz Love. And we we named that ministry in honor of O.C. Dietz, who is a longtime leader of Clearview Baptist Church, which is a church that graciously gave their property to us, and we're so thankful for that. And this week, I went to Lakeview Middle School and said, hey, I know I'm a teacher here, but our church wants to serve Lakeview Middle. There's not a lot of other churches that are connected to Lakeview Middle, and I said, hey, what's a big need that we could meet this week? And one of those needs came back. There was 15 families at Lakeview Middle School who were in need of some food, and because of your generosity in giving and because of that Dietz Love ministry that we have here at the church to spread God's kingdom into our community, doing local things to help people, we were able to provide groceries for all those families. They're going to get those groceries this week. So thank you for giving, being able to bless the families in our community. So thank you so much for that. I want to say 4 words that maybe you've said them or maybe somebody has said them to you, but either way, there's usually some frustration behind them, all right? Here's these 4 words. I don't get it, right? You ever said those 4 words? If you are a leader, a supervisor, coach, a teacher, a parent, and you say that to your kid, or your kid says that back to you, you're like, why, right? Like you've taught that. Maybe they say it back to you. Maybe they don't say the words, but they may say it this way. I don't know, right? Or maybe you tell them to go and do something, and when they go and do it, it is not the way you told them to do it. And you're like, okay, you clearly don't get what I just told you to do. And sometimes that I don't get it just comes out of a place of frustration. Last week, when we were in earlier part of Mark chapter 6, the disciples have just fed 5,000 people. Jesus has taken a couple pieces of bread, some fish, and just fed all these thousands and thousands of people. And when they leave that, I kind of see them having a side discussion. Now, the Bible doesn't give us every single detail, but you know people, I know people. We can kind of hear the talking, right? Now, think about it. You've been hungry all day, okay? Long John Silver's ain't going to cut it, all right? But that's what Jesus just fed you, except it's probably a little soggy fish, right? I mean, I don't know, maybe the fish came down golden fried from heaven when Jesus blessed it. Like, I don't know how it flowed out, but either way, there's bread and fish, right? There's no tartar sauce. There's no Hush Puppies. There's no Dr. Pepper. There's no chips. There's no fries. There's none of that. It's just bread and fish, right? And you've been listening to this dude preach for like hours, okay? You kind of probably hear a couple people going, man, that was awesome, but I heard he turned water into wine. Could he not turn like fish into filet mignon a little bit? You know, I mean, if he can really do all these things, could you not do that for me a little bit? You probably hear some murmuring coming out of the crowd. The disciples also are probably having a discussion talking about how everything happened, and they're probably talking among themselves, and they say, you know, Jesus used to use us for everything. He used to look to us for the support. He used to use us as the main people to make things happen, but he just used that little boy. Maybe we're not as important as what we thought we were. There's probably some murmurs that are going on inside of the disciples. Because in verse 52, we see that they don't get it. In fact, just jump down with me to verse number 52. It says, "For they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened." You know, when Jesus does something, he doesn't just do it, just to do it. He does it to transform us. He does it to teach us. He does it to reveal himself to us. And this miracle that they just seen, the disciples are walking away and they're saying these 4 words: I don't get it. They just don't get it. You know what my fear is as a pastor is that we can be around a lot of great things that God does and us just not get it. We can be a part of a lot of great things, a lot of great Bible studies, a lot of great things God does through the church. We can serve, we can give, we can spend our time doing all these things, but at some point in time, our heart might become hardened. And maybe like, yeah, God's awesome. Maybe like, man, that music was good. Maybe like, hey, that's really cool what they're doing. Hey, that's cool we were a part of this. But our heart could be hardened to the things of Jesus, and we're a part of it, but it doesn't become a part of us. And we say, I don't get it. In the passage we're going to look at today, the disciples are going to go into something called a pause. There's a guy by the name of William Bridges who wrote a book. I would highly recommend it to any leader inside this room, anybody who desires to lead. It's called Managing Transitions. And I have a picture that'll come up on the screen for us. Not that far. There it is. Managing Transitions. You can buy it there on Amazon. Not right here on Amazon, but you can go to Amazon. There they have a paperback for $10.79. It's about roughly 200 pages with all the bibliography and all that stuff. So you could read that in, weeks, 2 weeks, take a time, work through it. But basically, one of the things that he talks about is in life, we go through transitions. That when we think of change, you may think of change like this. Like if you got married and you're the man, you changed her last name. Maybe the way that you think of change. However, real change is transition. Let me give you an example. You changed her last name, but she doesn't squeeze the toothpaste out of the toothpaste tube the way that you want her to, right? Ladies, he puts the toilet paper on backwards, right? There's moments of transition that even though a change has happened, A has become B, there's still a process that we go through. Think of a change that we recently experienced as a church, right? Clearview owned property, and now it's changed to Fort Baptist. However, there's a transition where we all mold together and assume one identity as a church. It's a process going forward. And that change process is made up of things called neutral zones. In fact, I have a picture of what neutral zones look like. The neutral zones, when you think about change, a lot of times we think about change as linear, of if I do this, I'll get here. However, change is more like this, every which way. So you may be in a business and running a business, and then you make a change, and there's somebody who's a big supporter of yours. And they're like, man, this is awesome, this is great. You get like 2 weeks into the changes, and then they're going, I don't like this. And they back off. That's why in churches, you'll have committees of people who are like all for something. They get to the moment of presenting it, and when they present it, then somebody's like, yeah, I don't agree anymore. And you're like, what? Right? It's processes of change and fluctuation. So here's what can happen in our Christian life. You and I want to grow, and when we think about growing, we think about incrementally all the time growing in our faith. However, our spiritual growth, called sanctification, can actually be more like this. Raise the roof, right? So some of y'all just thought I danced in church. I did not, all right? But sometimes it can be like that. Like our plan is like straight to the goal. God's plan is like you got to fight piranhas, you got to climb a mountain, you got to go across a tight wire, right? Like that's God's plan. And sometimes one of the hardest things about God's plan is when he puts us into moments that we call pauses. Whereby every meaning of the word and every meaning of what we want to do, we want to move forward, right? We want to grow. We want to see God do more things, new things, awesome new things. But it's like we're just hitting a brick wall. We just can't go where we want to go. And we just pause. And everybody goes through it. In fact, the disciples are in it in Mark chapter 6. So with the honoring of the reading of God's word, please stand with me this morning. Let's see what the Bible has to say to us today. Immediately, he, speaking of Jesus, made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. And after he had taken leave of them, he went up on the mountain to pray. And when evening came, the boat was out on the sea, and he was alone on the land, and he saw that they were making headway painfully, for the wind was against them. About the fourth watch of the night, he came to them, walking on the sea. He meant to pass by, but when he saw them walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost and cried out. For they all saw him and were terrified. But immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." Verse 51. And he got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased, and they were utterly astounded, for they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. When they had crossed over, they came to land at Gennesaret and moored to the shore. And when they got out of the boat, the people immediately recognized him and ran about the whole region and began to bring the sick on their beds to wherever they heard he was. And wherever he came, in villages, cities, or countryside, they laid the sick in the marketplaces and implored him that they might touch him, even the fringe of his garment. And as many as touched it were made well. Thank you. You may be seated. Now again, there's a lot of things in the Bible that we don't know because we just don't have time or space to have it recorded, right? There'd be trilogies. There'd be movies upon movies, books upon books, almanacs upon almanacs written of what Jesus had done, about the stories of the disciples, all the things that happened. So in this case, we don't get all the details, but I think we know enough about the disciples to kind of play it out a little bit. Here's what I think was kind of happening. So Jesus and the disciples, they just fed everybody, right? They're just missing people. And remember, when they went to feed the people, Jesus told them, hey, y'all are going to go get some rest. So now I bet the disciples are looking back at Jesus going, Jesus, how about that rest that you promised, man? And Jesus is like, all right, get in the boat, go to the other side of the shore. So all the disciples get into the boat, and they're standing there in the boat, and one of them's about to push off, and they look back and they're like, wait, are you not coming with us, Jesus? And Jesus says, no, hold on, I got to do some more Jesus things. I'm going to stay right here with all these folks. I'm going to feed some people. I'm going to talk to some people. I'm going to heal some people, and I'll meet you over there. You can kind of see some of the cogs in the disciples' brains are starting to work, and they're going, we know nobody has invented a scooter yet, or like a car or a motorcycle. Like, how is he getting over here? And they're like, okay, Jesus, are you sure? Are you sure about this? Or are you going to take another boat? Like, what are you going to do? And he says, yeah, just get in the boat, go to the other side. So they get in the boat, and they push off. Jesus meets with the crowd. He's got a crowd all around him. You could see, like, kind of envision with me, the disciples are sailing out on the boat. You can hear the ripple of the water along the boat. They look back at Jesus, and he's on shore. There's people around him. And then they see Jesus walk up onto a mountain away from the crowd and just kind of sit there and do, like, the Jesus prayer thing, like, right? And while Jesus is doing that, the disciples have hoisted the sail. The wind is blown into the sail, and they're going out into the lake. And as they're going out into the lake, they're ready to get to the other side to do exactly what Jesus has told them to do. They're making a headway. And remember, a lot of these guys are fishermen. They know how to sail. They know the water. And as they're moving on the water, it's just frustrating. You can hear one guy going, hey, we're not making headway like we used to be. I know there's this wind, but we need to turn the boat and go this way. And here's what you need to know about the disciples. The majority of the disciples were teenage boys, with Peter being the oldest. He was probably late 20s, early 30s. So picture this. You've got a guy like me trying to herd around about 11 sixth graders, okay, which I do on a daily basis, and it's crazy. So they're trying to, Peter's like, hey, get it together, guys. And they're like, no, we need to do this. No, we need to do this. No, we need to do this. And Peter's like, no, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to throw somebody overboard, right? Remember the story of Jonah? About to find that whale right now, all right? So he's trying to tell them, hey, do this, do this. And you can see, like, there's some arguments breaking out on the boat, and Jesus is just sitting up there on the mountain just praying. But then the passage says Jesus looks down from the mountain and sees what? The disciples struggling to make headway. They've paused, and they're not going anywhere. Isn't that the most difficult place to be in life? I used to hear it said that sometimes you can fall into like a rut, right? Where it just seems like you can't get out, can't go left, can't go right, you're stuck. Somebody one time said that a rut was a grave with the ends kicked out. Man, I felt that. Sometimes in a pause, when we want that new job, when we want that new thing, when we want God speaking to us in this new, we want God to do a new thing in us, we've been praying about something, and we just feel stuck. That's when all the voices start to come. In fact, when you really think about going through a transitionary period and being in a pause, I thought about it this week, and I really think these voices, a transition, or the people of transition, are going to come into our lives. There's a slide for that, Brock. The first one is the realist. The realist is always the person that comes to you and says, hey, that's not working. And you're like, thank you, Captain Obvious, right? Like, I know that. I'm frustrated right now. And then maybe you have somebody that's in your life that they're the driver, that they're like, I don't care what happens, we're going, right? And they figure out a way. They're always about like, how can I just work hard, just grit my teeth and bear it, and just push forward, right? That's the driver. Then there's the told you so person. What a spiritual blessing they are, right? The told you person comes into your life and they say things like, I told you you weren't following Jesus. If you were following Jesus, you'd be back on the shore with him praying right now. You wouldn't be out here in this boat. You may think he told you that, but I told you he didn't say that. Jesus wouldn't tell you to go ahead when he's back there and leave him all by his lonesome. You could also hear it this way. I told you not to propose that thing to vote for at church. I told you that motion was a bad motion. I told you that person was a bad person. I told you not to trust them. When the least bit of confrontation comes up. And then suddenly the sleuth comes in. The sleuth comes into your life, and they bring the magnifying glass, and they're like checking out every little crevice, and they're looking into your life to figure out what has gone wrong. They want to identify every single little problem. So the sleuth comes into your life, and you're like, man, I just want to figure out what I can do to go forward. And the sleuth says, well, here's what you did wrong back in 1976. Boom. And you're like, wasn't even born in 1976. And they're like, but your parents were, right? I mean, like, the sleuth is the person that they want to find the dirt. So something you've left behind in your past a long time ago and you've moved on from Jesus, they're going, hey, remember when you did that? The reason you can't move forward now is because of that sin from all the way back there. I love to dig it up. And one of the most frustrating, I can deal with all the other ones. It's this one that gets on my nerves the most. Just spoiler alert. The prayer. You're like, pastor doesn't like praying. That's not what I said. Here's what I mean by the prayer. The prayer is the person that they could be standing outside of the church and it could be on fire with a fire extinguisher sitting right beside them. And they just go, we just need to pray about it. The Lord will provide. And he's like, he provided a fire extinguisher. Like, use the fire extinguisher. And they just want to pray about everything. They don't want to do anything. Now, hear this. There's a fine line between praying too much and doing too much. There's a balance that comes in the middle where we pray and we do out of faith to show the prayer is in faith. Okay? If you're just like, hey, I'm just going to pray and God's going to drop this job in my lap and you're never going to fail an application, probably not going to happen. On the other side, if you're filling out every application and not praying about it, probably going to get the wrong job, right? Then you get the next to the last one, you get the doomsdayer. The doomsdayer kind of works off the sleuth, and they're like, we're all going to die, right? Like, this is the person I can see in the boat that, like, there's little ripples coming, along the water, and there's one white cap that comes over the boat. And when it comes over the boat, they're like, we're drowning, we're drowning. And everybody's like, dude, you grew up on this lake. Chill out for a second, right? And this is the person that, in church, they're like, oh, man, we missed budget 1 week. We're going under. And it's like, yeah, but we were over the last, 7 weeks. They're like, but we missed it, right? It's the person that, second guesses everything that happens. It's the person that's like, man, that Rona got 2 people this week, and it's coming back, right? Shut down. It's like, relax a little bit, relax a little bit. It's the person that when you go up to at work, and you're like, hey, how you doing today? And they're like, I'm just making it. And you're like, I think life is a little bit better than making it. I'm just surviving. And you're like, but you have a good job, you got a good family. I'm just surviving, man. I'm just trying to make it through the day. And you're like, okay, man, let Jesus' joy notify your face, right, that he's alive in your life. And then you get the final person, the second guesser. The second guesser will make any pause turn into an about face faster than any of the other ones. Because here's what the second guesser does. The second guesser makes you wonder if you missed Jesus in the first place. Because here's what they'll say. If you hadn't made that choice, You could be doing what you used to be doing. You know, if you hadn't made that choice, you could go back there and life would be a whole lot more comfortable for you. Hey, you know what? Maybe you missed it. Maybe you thought God said that, but actually it was just your brain. Are you sure you heard God? And here's the thing, if you don't have these people in your life, you'll hear these voices in your head. Because Satan loves to send these voices into your head every single time. And here's what you have to remember. Jesus is sitting up on a mountaintop, watching the disciples, watching all this stuff unfold, as if it was accidental, as if he had no plan for it, as if they were in trouble. They weren't in trouble, they were just in a pause. And one of the things that we have to learn as Christians is that every single moment of pausing is not an attack from Satan. Sometimes it's an opportunity to learn about Jesus. In fact, just look back at verse 48. In verse 48, it says, about the fourth watch of the night, he, speaking of Jesus, came to them. Walking on the sea, he meant to pass them by. Realize this. Jesus has them somewhere where he told them to go. So in obedience, they went into a moment of pause. In obedience, they went somewhere that Jesus told them to go, and they stopped and they weren't going forward. Think about this. Sometimes God will send you and me into frustrating circumstances just so Jesus can show up. He doesn't go down there to rescue them. He goes down there to pass them by. You're like, why would Jesus just walk by them? What a showboat. That's not it. Not it at all. In fact, I did a word study on this phrase, pass by, this week. And it happens a couple of times. It's very interesting in the Old Testament for us to look at. In fact, the first one occurs in Exodus chapter 33, verses 19 through 23, where Moses has been up on the mountaintop on Mount Sinai getting the law of God for the Israelites. And they've been without him for 40 days. There's some crazy stuff going on down at the very bottom of the mountaintop. And here's what Moses needs to know. Moses needs to know that God's presence is with him. So here's what God tells him in verses 19 through 23. Moses, I want you to hide behind this cleft of the rock, and my presence is going to pass by you. It's going to come by you, Moses. I want you to see it as it goes by. It's also used in another passage in 1 Kings chapter 19. 1 Kings chapter 19, there's a prophet named Elijah. Elijah has just defeated the prophets of Baal by calling down fire from heaven. In calling down fire from heaven onto a wet sacrifice, he proves to these false prophets that there is one God that they can worship. His name is Yahweh. Yahweh, right? Pun intended. So, some of y'all get that later. It's on Aiden's shirt. So, when he does this, all of a sudden he gets massively discouraged because there's a queen named Jezebel who says, hey, I'm going to kill you, Elijah. And he's like, oh, I'm going to forget my God. So he ran out into the desert, and when he runs out into the desert, God says, hey, I need to reassure you that I'm with you and that I'm real and that I'm powerful. So I'm going to hide you here in the cleft of this rock. I'm going to pass by you. There's something called the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament, and it uses the same phrase as pass by in this passage as it does in these two passages, meaning Jesus' purpose in putting them into the pause was not just to have them squander and be frustrated and mad and angry like you and I can sometimes get. It was to put them into a place to where he could show his glory to them in a way they didn't see any way else. I don't know about you, but I feel like life is busier than ever. We all have the same 168 hours in a week. But man, sometimes I need 175 of them. What if we were too busy to hear what God was trying to say to us? What if some of us don't need to pray for God to do more in our lives, but we need to pray for God to pause us more? What if we just need to say, God, I've had a hard heart. I've been around the things of God a lot. I've been around your miracles. I've been around a growing church. Been around the Bible. I've been around singing. I've been around praying. I've been around all these things. But God, I've missed who you are. See, what Jesus does here is he does something that echoes back to the book of Isaiah. In the book of Isaiah, God is said to have walked on the water. And when Jesus walks on the water, the disciples just have this moment from going, I don't get it, to going, I get it. He's not just a teacher. He's not just a supplier. He's not just a miracle worker. He's not just somebody leading me in a good way of life. He is God in flesh. Here's what's even more incredible about it. Sometimes in stories, there's like a use of geography. And if you're like, I don't like geography, just bear with me here for a second, okay? So think about where Jesus was. Jesus was up on the mountaintop. Think about where the disciples were, down on the water. Now, in the Hebrew mind, as they read the story, when they see storms on water, they think of evil. If you think about all the way back to Genesis chapter 1, when God created the world, the Spirit of God is hovering over the depths of the sea. And the thought is that there's evil inside of the sea, which I fully agree with. I hate water, okay? So if you love Jesus, I'm joking. But here's the point. The thought is this. Jesus is up on a mountaintop, looking down at some men who can't make progress against things that are evil. And what does he do? He comes down to them. Do you see that? That God in flesh comes down to man, and then when he gets into the boat, he doesn't just come to just take them out of the storm. He doesn't just come to take them out of the weather. He doesn't just come to take them out of the ship. He comes to be with them. And that's the whole picture of the gospel. That's the entire picture of what Jesus is trying to show these hard-hearted people. That it's not just about coming to a church and singing songs. It's not just about giving. It's not just about growing ministries and singing bigger songs and bigger bands and all that. It's ultimately about loving Jesus. And for some of us, we've made life all about growing our 401k, but we are spiritually bankrupt. And for some of us, we want to climb the corporate ladder, but the problem is we've got to get out of hell, and that 2-foot corporate ladder that we're growing up and walking up is going to get us there. And the problem is we're trying to fix our families without fixing our soul. And the problem is we're doing all of these things and we're missing Jesus. Listen, it's good to have a good family. It is good to be a good business person. It is good, students, to be smart. It is good to be good at athletes. It is good to be good in relationships and love and be true and sincere. But none of that goodness matters when it falls to the greatness of Jesus. And we ultimately have to come back to a place for all of us to say, hey, I don't just want the good stuff in life. I want to be about the greatness of life, which is Jesus. And God, forgive us for what we've made it. Forgive us for making it just songs on a Sunday morning with an offering and a message for 30 minutes. God, forgive us for Him going to the cross and us thinking that we could live however we want to, Monday through Saturday, and then coming to church and everything being right on Sunday. God, forgive us for making it anything about us and not all about Him. I'm going to tell you, it wrecked me this week, looking at this passage and looking at verse 52, realizing that these disciples just fed 5,000 people. They saw all the miracles of Jesus. And our churches will be packed full of people, and I have been that person that I've made about everything but the Lord. And listen, this is so true for so many of us. Verse 52, they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. Listen. If we do anything as a church, it will always be to give glory to Jesus. If we do nothing else as a church, it will be to give honor and glory to Jesus. We have celebrated and loved the exciting things we've gotten to do with the feeding the 14 families that we got to talk about today, starting the 9:30 service that officially kicks off next week. All the ministry we've gotten to do, growing, starting things, it's been incredible. But you know what scares me to death? Is that God can do all of those things and our hearts be hard to Him. Because it was true for the disciples. In Numbers chapter 22, God spoke through a donkey. God doesn't need me. Some of y'all laughed a little too hard at that. God said if we don't cry out and worship Him, rocks will. God doesn't need us, He wants us. And when it comes down to it, some of us just need to pause a little bit and say, God, don't give me more. God, just help me be obedient with what I have now. God, just help me to worship you again. God, help me to not make it about a checklist. God, help me not to make it about a social club, getting to see my friends, but getting to worship you, God. Some of us need to realize we're not just in it for us and what it does for us. We're in it because we realize it's about Jesus, and He's what's best. Yesterday, Shasta and I were taking Ellen, and we were running some errands and stuff. We were out, and we just had to grab food out. And Ellen was, if you know Ellen, she loves food. And she was in one of her little moods of needing some food. So we were handing her like little snacks into the back seat. And we knew that dinner was coming up. And we try to be responsible parents and be like, hey, you need to wait so that you don't ruin your dinner. And we're going to eat in just a little bit. And she didn't like that. And she let us know very loudly from the back seat. So we pulled into the restaurant, and I said, honey, hold on. So I jumped out of the car, ran around, opened up the door. I said, babe, listen. It's okay. I'm like consoling her. She's just mad on my shoulder. I'm like, babe, it's okay. You're wanting that little bit of food, but look, there's a big restaurant behind that's got more food than you could ever imagine. It's okay. Chill out. Don't get mad about what you don't get here. Think about what you're about to get. Think about that. In that moment, God just got me. He said, Ryan, why don't you listen to your own advice? How many times do we complain about the pause instead of realizing God's trying to use the pause to start something new? How many times do we can complain to God and say, God, take me out of this. I can't go forward. And God's saying, you don't need to go forward because you've missed it back there. I say, God, but this is hard. He says, yeah, it's like the only way I can get through to you. And sometimes what we need to realize is that pauses aren't against us. They're something God uses for us. In that transitionary period of faith, I want to tell you something that's going to come up on the screen for you today. What we need to realize about pauses in life, it's the main statement, Brock, is that if God brings us, that's not quite it. If God brings us to it, He will meet us in it. Unless it's not on proclaim. Here, I'm going to say this statement again for you. If God brings you to it, He will meet you in it. If God brings you to it, He will meet you in it. Here's what I wonder for us as a church. Man, it's been incredible seeing all the things that God has done. The 19 baptisms, we prayed for 20. We're so close. We're praying for more. Seeing 20-something salvations this year, incredible. God gifting us property and just incredible people from Clearview just blow my mind. How good God's been to us. Everything about our church is saying on the uptick. You know what scares me to death? What if in the middle of all of that, our hearts were hard? What if we became more about the organization than the Savior? What if we became more about what was good for us and our preferences than about laying our lives down sacrificially for the Lord of the world to use us, to reach the world with His gospel? What if we gained the whole world but lost our soul? This morning, I just want us to pause. Just bow your head, close your eyes for just a second. Just in this moment, I just want you to pray a prayer back to Jesus. Just ask Him this one question. Jesus, how are things with you and me? Ask him this follow-up question. Jesus, do I really know that I know that I've given my life to you? Follow it up with this. Why? Anything less than fully giving your life to Jesus and making him the Lord of your life means you have not given your life to him. So maybe right now we just need to pause and just get right with Jesus by giving our lives to him. If that's you, you can get right with Jesus right now just by praying a short, simple prayer like the one I'm about to pray. Dear Jesus, I know I have sinned. I have disobeyed you. Because of that sin, I deserve eternity separated from you. But Jesus, I believe you died on the cross for my sins and that you rose 3 days later. Jesus, please forgive me for my sins. I give you my life today.